All right. Well, we will get started then. This morning we are going to be in the book of Esther, which is right behind Nehemiah.
That helps.
Right in front of Job. Let's see where it is in there. And when Wes called me, I think I told y'all before, I have been doing the Bible in a year on my phone, and I had just finished up Esther. Esther's going to be on 568.
What chapter?
We're going to start with chapter 1, but our main focus is, I got a main verse. Our main verse is going to be 4:14, but we're going to start with chapter 1 and look at a little bit of the preview in Esther and get a little bit of background. Esther was a book in the Bible that it's 10 chapters. You do not find God's name mentioned in Esther. It's the only book in the Bible that you don't see where God's name is actually mentioned. And there is obviously reasons for that. But I found that very interesting, because we think God's name is mentioned everywhere, and in the book of Esther we don't find God's name. The king at the time was King Xerxes, and he was Darius the Great's son. And this starts off with King Xerxes having a banquet. So in chapter 1 it starts off, now it took place in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. And Israel was in that 127. In those days, as King Xerxes sat on his royal throne, and Xerxes was his Persian name. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of the princes and attendees, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180. So for 6 months. And in those days when those days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present, and from the greatest to the least in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So the banquet that he gave was for all of the men attended the king's banquet. No ladies. All of the ladies attended the queen's banquet, which was totally separate. And it says there that in 6, in the palace, there were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of fine purple linen, on silver rings and marble columns. Now get this in your brain of what this looks like. Because this is linen. And it's beautiful. And they have adorned where they are in this court with white and purple cords of fine purple linen hanging with silver rings and marble columns. And conchs of gold and silver on majestic pavement, and marble and mother of pearl and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds. That means all of the cups he had, each one of them was different. Now we might have different cups in our house because we break them all, so we don't have, but he deliberately had different cups made. And the drinking was done according to the law. So, for the king had no given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Xerxes. So, we have the men who were having a banquet and had been drinking for days, because every time the king held up his drink and said, toast to this or toast to that, everyone in there was required to drink. Now, if you weren't, he would tell you you didn't have to. But if he didn't say you don't have to, that's what your requirement was. So for days, 7 days, they'd been having this banquet, and these men had been in there drinking. The women had been over having their banquet. And on the 7th day, in verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, which means he was pretty drunk, he commanded that his head of his people and the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Xerxes to bring Queen Vashti before the king in her royal crown in order to display her beauty to people and princes, for she was beautiful. Okay, he ordered the queen to leave her banquet and come to him and show her beauty. Now this was not done, not even for the king. He had to call, whether it was his queen or his concubine, he had to call for them to come in. They were to be veiled. They were never to be unveiled anywhere around. That was just not done until they got in the presence, and then if he would tell her to unveil. He's asking her right here to come in unveiled in all her beauty in front of all these men who've been drinking for 7 days. And she refuses, because this is just not done. So when she refuses, in 12, his eunuch comes back, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, and it was delivered by the eunuch. Then the king became very angry, with his wrath burned inside him. Now he made decisions based on, and this is all in here, based on these 7 men, other princes who were there. He would ask their opinions. What do you think I ought to do? What do you think I ought to do? He didn't just stand up and I'm the king and, okay, well, I'll deal with her. He had asked her to come in. When she didn't come, he said, well, what do y'all think I ought to do? And according to them, they felt like if he didn't do something, then their wives would stand up against them and not do what they were supposed to do. Because in those days, wives did what their husbands said. No questions. So they gave him advice to take the queen and put her away and get a new queen from all the virgins. Just have them come in, and they would get a year's worth of beauty treatments, and then he could pick the queen he wanted out of these virgins. Now, all of these virgins that he brought in, whichever one wasn't the queen, was still going to be in a harem and be his concubines. So, the time-wise, between the time that he dismissed Vashti and chose a new queen, was about 4 years. And he was in war during that 4-year period. But during this year, after the 4 years, and he was going to choose a queen, he had all these ladies chosen to come into this harem. And we see where Esther was chosen to be a part of that. Mordecai was a Jew. And Mordecai's had taken in Esther when her parents died. And from all history that we can see, Esther's parents died. Her father had died before she was born, and her mother died in childbirth. So Mordecai had taken Esther as a baby and raised her. So Mordecai was a daddy figure to her. So she did whatever he said do. And when you look at that in itself, you see where God had his hand on Esther. And Esther, I think in Persian, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, Esther means star. Is that right, Buck? Do you remember if Esther means star in Persian?
No.
You don't remember? I think I remember that correctly. Do you, David? Do you? So we see that God had his hand on Esther from her birth. And he put her in Mordecai's home. And we look at her not having parents as a disaster. You know, when we lose people and people are taken from us and we don't know why, you know, we're real quick to say, you know, God, what is going on here, you know. But in this situation, you know, hindsight's 20/20. God had his hand on Esther the entire time. God never left Esther. She listened to Mordecai. She was a good child. And when the king was looking for a new queen, Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, said, Esther, you know, you need to go.
And it does mean star.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Looked it up.
And that in itself is unique, you know. So we see that the first point is she was born with a purpose. And she didn't know what her purpose was, and Mordecai didn't know what her purpose was. And God was in the presence there to put her in the place he wanted her put, to be in Mordecai's household. Because if her mom and dad had lived, we don't have any idea that they would even been in this city. They may have moved away. You know, we have no idea what could have taken place. God knows more than we do. So the first point I want to make here is we're all born with a purpose. We don't know what our purpose is. We kind of have ideas, but we don't always know. So remember every day that you get up and you're feeling down and you're feeling like, okay, I don't even know why I'm here. It's not about you. It's about God has a purpose whether you realize what it is or not. So we're all born with a purpose. We see where Esther went through all of her beauty treatments. And I think it was in the 10th month that the king called for Esther to come into his inner court. And she was breathtakingly beautiful. And he chose Esther to be the queen. So, in the in-between time there, Mordecai had heard where two of the king's high officials planned to kill the king, and he had sent a word to the king about it, so the king executed them. So Mordecai had interceded for the king. But remembering that Mordecai was a Jew, and he was always trying to follow what God had said the Jewish people should do. So we see that Haman was a prince as well, and he was under, when the two officials were executed, then Haman stepped up and was under King Xerxes. And Haman had a plot to kill all the Jews. Now we see all through history where the devil has this thing going on to try to wipe out the Jews, because the Jews are God's chosen people. So for God's name not to be in this book anywhere, God shows up. You know, we can see God. Haman had a plan to kill the Jewish people. And it was written up, sent to all the different provinces, and that's when Mordecai ripped his clothes, went into mourning, and when Esther heard that, she sent clothes out to Mordecai, and she was like, "What is wrong? You know, tell me what's going on." And so he came in and he told Esther, or he sent word to Esther. He didn't come in. He sent word to Esther of what all was going on. And she said, "Well, what do I do?" Because she was still going to do whatever Mordecai said do, because she trusted him to know what the right thing was to do. So in chapter 4, verse 13, we see when Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you are in the king's palace and can escape any more than all of the Jews." So Mordecai is saying, this law that Haman had passed to kill all the Jews, don't think that you're going to escape from it. You're a Jew. They will kill you too. And they're going to kill all the Jews. And 14 says, "For if I remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." So, my second point is, God allows things so that He can get His plans fulfilled. He allowed Haman to be put in the position to have the authority to say, we need to get rid of these people because they don't worship like we do. And that's what got that written in the first place. Haman went to the king. He said, "Mordecai and the Jewish people, they don't bow down when you say bow down." Because they weren't going to bow down to a person. Jewish people were only going to bow down to God. And so, there again, King Xerxes says, "What do you think I ought to do about it?" You know, and Haman says, "Well, I think we ought to kill them all." And that's how the law was written, to kill the Jews. So we see where when Mordecai gave Esther this word, God had appointed her to be the queen. And God puts him, he gives us everywhere we go. God sends us where we're going. And we don't really realize, and I've had people tell me this before, you don't really think God shows up everywhere and takes care of all the little stuff. And I'm like, yeah. I think he takes care of all the little stuff. I don't think anything is insignificant to God. And I think he allows things to get his plan done. So Esther's parents died, which was a bad thing. Mordecai got her, which was a good thing. The king got rid of his queen, which was a bad thing. Esther got in there. That's the good thing. God allows. The law was written to kill all the Jews. Esther is a Jew, and the king loves her with all his heart. So Mordecai's telling her, you've got to go to the king. You've got to tell him, who you are now. Because she had kept quiet about who she was a Jew the entire time. He had no idea she was a Jew. So we see that she was not allowed to go to the king without the king summoning her. And Mordecai, this is what he told her. He said, you were put there for a purpose. You've got to go to the king, and you've got to tell him. So she does that. And when she goes into the king, he has to hold out his golden rod for her to touch to say it was okay. So when she goes in without permission, but he loves her and he holds out the rod for her to touch, which means come in and tell me what it is. And through a series of a couple of days of her having some banquets for Haman and the king, he keeps asking her, what is it that he can give her? What can he give her? And she tells him after several days that the decree has been written to kill the Jewish people, and that's her people. And of course, he's got to make a decision now. He never makes a decision on his own, but he's got to make a decision now. Whether I'm going to let this law stand or whether I'm going to do away with this law because I love my wife and she's in the Jewish people. So we all know how it ends. He loves Esther. He has the law done away with. And Mordecai takes the place of Haman because the king wants to know, well, how did this all take place anyway? And so when they realized that Haman was the one, and Haman wants to kill Mordecai, and when all of that comes out, the king ends up putting Mordecai on the pole that Haman had ready for Mordecai to be hung on. And Mordecai is raised up. So God raises up his people, and he sends the devil's people back where they came from. And we see that with Mordecai and with Esther, my third point is, when you stand up for what is right, God is already there. He was there before you got there, and he's there with you, and he's going to be there when you're gone. So this morning, my 3 points were, we're all born with a purpose. God allows things to happen which are not always good, but it's his plans. He will work his plans out for good. And stand up for what's right. What you know God says is right. And he's already there standing up with you. You don't have to worry that you're standing by yourself. He's already there. And I think that, because I'm a girl, I love Esther and Ruth. And I love going back and reading those over and over because I get a little something out of them every time that I didn't get before. And I think that's true about all the books of the Bible. But I find it interesting that there's discord in the Middle East, and so many people are, I don't know if they have a blind eye or if they're afraid to say, but this has been going on since the beginning of time. And it's not that we have anybody that can bring peace over there. This started with Abraham's kids, and we can't do anything about it. God's the only one. He's got a plan worked out. Our purpose is to fulfill what God has our purpose here to be, not to get so wrapped up in everything around us. We're to do what He's got for us to do here. Because our purpose, if it's to be a soldier and be over there, that's one thing. But if it's to be less the preacher and be right here over this little flock, that's what His purpose is, to lead and guide us. So be mindful this week of our purpose. It changes. We might think we're here to be a mama, or then we're here to be a grandmama, or we're here to be the hair cutter, or we're here to be the receptionist at the VA or whatever, we all have a purpose. And when we're feeling down, just remember, God put me here. He has a reason for me being here. So let's stand and be dismissed.